information. So, but I think we should be live now.
Hey, E for liveness.
Yeah. Do you see us? Are we there?
I don't see it on YouTube. Oh, we are live on Facebook, though.
Okay. Well, I don't know why this isn't live on YouTube. It should be live
We
on
are
YouTube.
live on YouTube.
Okay. So we did get both Facebook and YouTube. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Apocalypse Cocktail Happy Hour at the End of the World. I'm Nick Mather, host of the Rebel Spirit Radio podcast, and I am joined by Stephanie Bidet and Jeremy
Hello.
Anderson. How are you doing today, Stephanie?
Oh, I'm doing great, as always.
Yeah, I think you're lying.
I might be lying. I may have been up all night with my sick dog, but
Yeah.
Okay. Jeremy, how are you?
I am great considering the circumstances. How's that for an answer?
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so am I. I always enjoy having these conversations with the both of you. So today we're looking at some apocalyptic traditions, generally from the non-Abrahamic traditions, although they will kind of come in here a little bit. And we were thinking that the first one that we would look at would be Zoroastrianism, because Zoroastrianism in many ways is the OG in terms of apocalyptic tales. And just a little bit of background for anyone who may be unfamiliar with Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a really good bridge between the East and the West. And it has definite influences on the Abrahamic traditions, but also shares a lot with the traditions from India, in particular the Vedic traditions. The dating on Zoroastrianism is, and these are just the texts, go back to about 1500 BCE. And the texts that we have are mostly poems. And the poems or songs are collected. Those are called the gathas, and my pronunciation may be wrong on a lot of these. But collected together, it's the Avestas. And I think the word Avesta is etymologically related to the word Veda from the Indian tradition. But the key figure here is the prophet Zarathustra, who is also known as Zoroaster in the Greek, and that literally means life from a star. And so part of the tradition, Stephanie, I think you might appreciate this, Zarathustra is kind of like an astrologer, keeping watch of the heavens and whatnot. But Zarathustra is seen as a prophet, and I have no idea if Zarathustra was an actually existing person. I don't think anyone really knows whether Zarathustra was an actually existing person. But the story essentially, try to keep this as short as humanly possible. There's the Zoroastrian cosmology is predicated kind of on time, and there are two spirits, I guess, that emerge. And these are absolutes, and it's always interesting to me that the Zoroastrian tradition is seen as being monotheistic, but yet there are these two equally powerful beings or spirits, and I think that the answer is, well, there may be two, but we only worship this one as the creator and as our God. So the two beings or spirits, there would be the all good one, which is Ahura Mazda, and then the all bad one, which is Angra Mainyu. And they are in eternal conflict, and that is the cosmology that's set up, is one of dualism, of absolute good versus absolute evil. And in this cosmic battle, they create worlds and beings. And so our world was created as part of this. And so Ahura Mazda created us, and we're supposed to be beings of the light, and also created a bunch of angels. But Angur Mainyu is creating a bunch of dark creatures, including demons. And so it is this creation of the angels and demons, these armies in this cosmic battle, will find its way into the Judaic tradition. Because before you didn't, I mean, you had angels in terms of messengers of God, but you did not have what you find in the Zoroastrian tradition. And Zarathustra, his appearance indicates the last 3 millennia, the last 3,000 years. And if I understand correctly, it's this almost cycle of 6,000 years of time. And the battle continues. Demons infiltrate our world. Demons infiltrate us. What happens is finally there's going to be this final epic battle between good and evil. And it's the Frashkart. I think in the Persian it's a Frashokareti or something like that. And it's this kind of revitalization of the cosmos. It's a healing of the world. And so there's going to be a series of, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Saoshyants. And Zarathustra was the first. And the Saoshyants is kind of like a savior figure. And the other Saoshyants are going to be the sons of Zarathustra. Because what happened is that Zarathustra was kind of bathing or swimming in this lake and kind of left his seed in there. And so...
This is a PG show, Nick. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, I could have been a lot more explicit. But what's going to happen is, a couple of virgins, like 1,000 years apart, are going to go swimming in the lake and get impregnated. So you have virgin
that is
births.
some potent seed.
Yeah, isn't it though?
1,000 years later.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have sperm banks back then, so I guess the lake had to be sufficient, right?
Right.
There
Right.
you go.
Watch out, ladies.
Yeah, so there are going to be these sons of Zarathustra who are going to be these sort of savior figures and prophets. But in the final battle, what's going to happen is, the way it's described is that a heavenly dragon will fall down and set the world on fire. And so I think maybe this might be alluding to like a comet or something. And it's going to kind of push us closer to the sun. So the whole earth is going to be on fire. But fire is seen as good in the Zoroastrian tradition. Anything that's made of light is good.
Okay.
And so that's why their focus has been on fire rituals, which you also find a parallel in the Vedic tradition, because that's what they would do, is they would build the fire altars.
Right.
And make offerings into that.
So is that seen as like a purification?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is. And and so the ancient Zoroastrians, modeled off of this astrologer Zarathustra, would look at the sky and the stars for signs of the emergence of the Saoshyants. And we all know, I think, that the name for a Zoroastrian priest was a magi. And so they are looking at the night sky and at stars for signs of a savior. Just a little tidbit in there, right?
Right.
Oh, and that's
3 wise men.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And it never actually says 3. It just says the Magi. The 3, I don't know. Right. I think because there are the 3 gifts,
right?
People assume it's 3 Magi. That's me being literal here.
Right.
But the dead will rise. because we were never meant to die in the first place.
Ooh.
And then there will be judgment and then purification. And so the fire is already purifying everything. But there's going to be a river of molten metal that is going to go over humanity. That's the purification, right? Well, and it said in the text, it actually says, though, but if you've been good, don't worry. It's just going to feel like a bath of warm milk. So I know it's going to burn like hell. But after
Not if
this,
you're good, Nick.
it's going to burn like hell.
Be good, Nick. Be good.
It's going to burn like hell. I know this. It's going to sting. It's going to smart. But that's the process of purification, right? And at the end, humanity then gets to live in eternity in paradise with the good God, because evil has been banished from the cosmos.
Right.
And this story influenced the Judaic and then Christian ideas of apocalypse. This is where it comes from, because the Zoroastrian religion was the dominant religion in Persia during the time of the Babylonian exile. And when we date the writings from that period and on, you can see this dramatic shift. Right. And this is also where you start seeing this sort of full angelology and demonology. I always like to point out when I teach this stuff that, in much of the Hebrew Bible, there really isn't any mention of demons.
Right.
It's not until you get to the New Testament. And Jesus is a healer, but how does he heal?
Cast out demons.
He's casting out demons because it's the demons that make us sick. There's this idea of the resurrection of the dead. There are ideas of a savior figure that is going to come and that there's going to be this epic battle at the end of time, but also that the savior will be born of a virgin.
Right.
Right.
There's a lot of virgins floating around that time.
Yeah. So they say.
Yeah.
Apparently, was no one good.
Right.
So
pulling a sword from a lake is no foundation for a functioning government or something.
Yeah, exactly. you got to swim in the lake if you're going to get the virgins. You know,
watery tarts.
Any hope in society.
Yeah.
It's going to come out of that lake.
Yeah.
Oh, I need more sleep.
Yeah.
We may be punchy.
Right.
That's okay. That's okay.
Two of
That's
us
good.
haven't slept, so
yeah. Punchy is good. Punchy is really good. Punchy is very, very good. I was trying to think. There was something else I thought that was relevant here, but I don't remember. But anyway, the Zoroastrian idea is, again, kind of the OG. That was the one. Satan. Yeah. So Satan in the Hebrew Bible only appears, I think, 3 times. And 2 of those times, it's not as a proper name. It's the Satan, which means like the adversary.
Right.
The only time Satan appears as a figure is in the book of Job. And in Job, he is not absolute evil. He's hanging out with God. Yeah. And he's actually been given approval to do this stuff by God. You know, he does act as kind of like, he's the devil's advocate.
Yeah, he's kind of a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's a lawyer.
He's the devil's advocate to God. And he's like, giving God, he's like, well, but Job never cursed you because look at his life. It's awesome. He's wealthy. He's happy. He's got kids. Why would he curse you? He wouldn't curse you. He's playing the devil's advocate. He is not absolutely evil. You only start seeing this idea of Satan being evil after the Babylonian exile.
Right.
Because that's where they get exposed to this dualism of absolute good, absolute evil. and ideas of possession, that demons can take control of our bodies. So,
Yeah.
Mm.
It looks like we have some influence on Platonism and Neoplatonism too,
Mm.
going into the Greek or the dualism.
yeah. And I think that I could be wrong, but I think Plato mentioned Zarathustra at some point, or at least Zoroaster. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure
Huh.
about that. But yeah, it's definitely, if it wasn't influential, it was definitely parallel, because Plato does give us a dualism.
Right.
But he doesn't have an absolute evil, because for Plato,
No.
there isn't anything. It's just a lack of the good.
Right.
No, but that comes later, I think, in Neoplatonism, and you see that in terms of Gnosticism, don't you?
Well, I think in Gnosticism, there is absolute evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that does play into it, but much later, after Plato.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe this is, since we're talking about Plato and that kind of influence, maybe we can shift the flow here a little bit that we were thinking about, and maybe look at apocalypse in the ancient Greek, and then in the Hermetic, since you brought up Gnosticism, because it's sometimes really unclear. Something's Gnostic or Hermetic, or even if we should make that separation.
Right.
So, Jeremy, I know that you did a little bit of research on the ancient Greek.
Right,
what did you
and
get?
they don't have a clear understanding or the same sort of idea of apocalyptic as far as end of the world goes. But there are the 5 ages of man, or some writings contain the 4 ages of man. So it's the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age. Sometimes there's a heroic age, and at the end is the Iron Age.
Okay.
So the Golden Age is when the Titans actually ruled, and that's when human beings were perfect. And then Zeus comes out, kills off the Titans, and creates the Silver Age. And human beings are still good, but they have to start working for their food. That's when agriculture comes in. The Bronze Age is the age of war. So, and each time there's sort of a resetting of the world. And so, because the Bronze Age was so warlike, the gods just like, we're done with this. Let's try it again. And then comes maybe the heroic age, again, depending on the source you're looking at. And that's when people like Achilles, Oedipus, or I'm throwing out Greek names right now. I don't speak Greek, but you know what I mean. Those big heroes we think of the Greek heroes, Perseus. That's when they lived, as the heroic age. And some people attribute that to the end of the Bronze Age, and sometimes it's its own individual age. And then the final age is the Iron Age, and that's when people turn away from the gods altogether. The question is, what happens at the end of the Iron Age? Because we've forgotten the gods, what comes next? There's some people that say that it starts over again, and we've got this cyclic thing. Some people say that it all comes to a grinding halt. So again, it's not really this idea of the apocalypse, but if we're in this Iron Age, what comes next? It's a big question.
All right. Now that we're just going to go freeform here, because that mirrors one of the ideas within the Indian tradition that emerges, I think, around 300, 500 of the Common Era, which is the text or the Puranas. Puranas, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, which are kind of mythic tales, but there's this vast cosmology and cycles of time. And there are 4 dominant ones, and these are called yugas.
Yes.
So there's the Kirta Yuga, which is also known as the Golden Yuga. And it mirrors exactly what you were just talking about. This one is where humans are happy, and humans lived to about 900 years old. And it's always interesting to me that you find that in some of the traditions around the world. We see that in the Hebrew Bible, in Genesis, that humans could live very long times. And the Kirta, sometimes it's called the Satya Yuga, lasts 1,728,000 human years. And then there's the Treta Yuga, which is known as the Silver Yuga. And this is where humans are mostly happy, but we don't live as long. Now we only live to about 700 years old. But disease and poverty have been introduced into the world. This one lasts 1,296,000 human years. Then there's and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this, the Davapada, which is the Bronze Yuga. This one lasts 864,000 years. And in this one, it's like 50-50 in terms of humanity. There is disease, there's poverty, there's war, there's suffering. Everyone is touched by suffering. About half of us are pretty happy. But the other half, we live in constant misery. And then the last one is the Kali Yuga.
Right.
And this one lasts 432,000 years. They always say that it begins with the war that is told in the Mahabharata. And this is traditionally dated, I missed a zero here, but I think 3100 BCE. So the Kali Yuga is where we are right now. We are in the Kali Yuga. And that one lasts 432,000 years. I haven't done the math, but if it started in 3100 BCE, we still have a little bit of time in the Kali Yuga here. But
we may not live to see it.
Yeah. And this is where humans just live to be like 70 years old, and we all suffer. War and violence and poverty and disease are rampant. But I think that the difference, this is a age of darkness.
Right.
Kali Yuga is an age of darkness. And this also feeds into something that you had said in regards to the final age that you were listing, I think the Iron Age, in terms of goodness and whatnot. In the Kali Yuga, Dharma is lost. And Dharma in the Indian tradition it's almost like the morality. It's the sense of duty that you have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But all of this is going to be renewed. And so in this telling of the story, what happens is at the end, everything's destroyed. And one of the, and again, it's always difficult when we talk about, I always avoid Hinduism. No offense to our beloved instructor of Hinduism, Jenny Ishimatsu. But one of the things that I always say when I teach is, well, there's no such thing. It's a construct, right? And there was this story that was told that fits into all of this, that feeds into what they refer to as the Hindu Trinity. And I also always tell my students there's no such thing as that. Because the idea of a Hindu Trinity is really the interpretation from missionaries originally. But there is this idea of three, but you find that various other places. But you've got Brahma. First, you've got Brahman, the ineffable God. And then out of this ineffable Godhead emerges Mahavishnu, the great Vishnu. And out of the great Vishnu, you get Brahma, who's the creator God. And then eventually you get Vishnu, because Brahma creates everything, and everything takes on a life of its own. And Brahma kind of like just steps away and lets everything just kind of go about its business. And that's where suffering comes in. And then Vishnu comes in to help save the suffering. But then, and there is supposed to be another incarnation of Vishnu. These are the avatars of Vishnu. And there's a whole cycle of those, and some of the ones that most people may be familiar with would be Rama, then Krishna. The Buddha is considered from the Hindu perspective, he's considered an avatar of Vishnu. But there is a Vishnu to come, Kirti, who's also like a savior figure. But you also get this notion that Shiva is the destroyer.
Right.
And that's the Nataraja, the symbol of Shiva dancing, which I have kind of behind me. You can't see it very well.
Oh, I thought you were going to pose for us.
Come on.
You lift one leg and okay.
I can do this, though.
Can't hear you, Nick.
Nick, we lost you.
Oh, no. This is where we need the fire alarm to go off. Okay.
I
Yeah.
actually accidentally hit the mute. I got all excited because I was getting my Shiva. But yeah, the Shiva maintains the universe through the dance, and Shiva is, by those who are Shaivites, is seen as the body of the cosmos and the universe. And so his dance maintains it.
Right.
But at the end, his dance is, he's like at a rave, he starts dancing really wildly. And so you see like his hair, the hair, his dreadlocks are kind of going all wild and everything. But he's dancing on the dwarf of ignorance. Um,
That's me.
yeah, well, that's me too. And I was going to look it up again, but I know that his hand gesture and his foot gesture have very specific meanings. I think it's
Right.
something like,
Right.
don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take care of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is the whole cosmos is destroyed, and in part because everyone's karma gets so mangled together that it's just impossible to get to untangle it all. And
Mm-hmm.
so the only way forward is through destruction.
Right.
And so that's what happens. And then what you get is, and this is kind of not quite a direct quote out of a book, but, and this is sort of mind boggling. So you've got, when you look at the different yugas, this is a total of 4,320,000 years. And this is where the world moves from a perfect state to one that's morally bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these total of the four yugas is called Manvantara, and that's the age or life period of a Manu, and that's like the archetypal human, I think.
Okay.
But what happens is after 1,000 Manvantaras, which comprises one day for Brahma, the creator god,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the universe will be destroyed by fire or flood. And then we go through a night of Brahma, which is also 1,000 Manvantaras. And then the process begins again.
Okay.
So it is this endless cycle of creation, destruction, creation, destruction, creation, destruction, creation, destruction. This process, one kalpa is one night and day of Brahma, and that is 8 million years. And the only reason that there's like creation and all of this happens is because of Lila, the play of God.
Yep.
So they give an answer
Yeah.
where the Greeks are like, I don't know what happens next.
Right.
And the Hindu answer is, it's the same damn thing over and over and over and over.
Right.
It is turtles all the way down, right?
That's right. That's right.
All right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, that's part of the Hindu tradition, not all of it, part of it is this idea of how the hell do we get off this loop? I'm tired of this ride. How do I get off the ride? And so the whole idea is moksha, which is like liberation, where you don't have to like reincarnate anymore. You're not generating karma anymore. You're gone. You are now part of the Godhead of Brahman. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a good one.
It's like-
So anyway.
yeah,
Right.
but you could see there's an influence there.
Right.
Definitely. I would say it's hard to say there's not an influence there, especially since we know that in Alexandria at some time we did have Hindu, Buddhist influence going on there.
Right.
So we know there's a crossover, but we also know that during the time of Alexander, there was crossover going on. There was conversations going on and sharing of ideas.
Right.
It's, but we don't talk about it very often.
Right.
But
Right.
it's hard to say. I mean, to me, it's impossible to say that there is no influence going on there. There most definitely were influences.
But Europe is the center of the universe. I'm just kidding.
Well, that seems to be the idea that some people have. There's let's see if I could reach this.
Uh-oh, she's pulling out a book. Please don't throw the book at me. She can't hear me.
I know the book.
Yeah, you have it too. Let's see.
I'm going to be hit by both of them at the same time.
Ooh, one from the right, one from the left.
That's right.
The Shape of Ancient
from the right,
Thought. But... And it's incredibly dusty, but it beautifully shows through art history.
Yeah.
The influences over, I think, a span of like either 600 or 800 years between Greek and Eastern thought.
Yeah.
Right.
And how that's shared.
Right. It's just mind-boggling that people didn't think that anything came from the outside to influence or went outside to influence. There's people have been talking to each other across the world for a really long time. So to think that this did not influence that because, there's a strict line right here that, no, come on.
Yeah.
Well, when I think I'm sorry, go ahead, Steph.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it kind of brings up questions of origin. Like, was there a common origin for these? And we can see this in some aspect going back to the Zoroastrian tradition because the Persians, where the Zoroastrian tradition, the homeland, there's a connection with the Indo-Europeans, the Indo-Aryans, right, coming down from the Russian steppe lands. And the original story was that these, the Aryans came down from the Russian steppe lands over the Caucasus Mountains. They went into Persia and then kind of made their way down into Greece and then also into India. And it used to be argued that they came down as this invading force into India, and that's been kind of rejected by almost all the scholars. Now I know that a lot of the Indian scholars will say, well, yeah, no, they kind of emerged out of India. But I think that this idea of migration makes more sense, that they just because the evidence that we have seems to follow that clue. So, is there a common origin or is there like a syncretism?
Right.
Maybe the answer is both. Maybe it's not, either or, maybe both things are happening, which explains the commonalities, but then also, as they spread, the differences. But then when you get the differences, you kind of come back and they're like, oh, hey, we have something like that too.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people talk about Occam's razor with these sorts of things, but when it comes to human interactions, I almost think the opposite is true. The more complicated story is probably the most correct. So there probably was some parallelism. But
it was aliens.
Some interaction. Good point. Good point. I'm sorry, I retract my statement.
Yeah, well, it's always the aliens.
I don't have the hair for that though.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. I'll do something then. I'll represent.
Well, we're going to have a whole episode on disclosure this year. So. Yeah. And I'm actually going to be, a little thing, I'm meeting someone. He's actually local who does a lot of work in like telekinesis and remote viewing and whatnot. And does a lot of mind things, and there are videos and whatnot. But he also claims to have had contact in these different states of consciousness with other beings, and is making the connection with aliens. And he also includes psilocybin mushrooms. So
nice.
It's going to be a good conversation. We're having coffee first. I can't wait. Because I'm like, oh my God.
In the coffee?
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, you're going to be my new best friend.
Nice.
Sorry, Steph. I know. He just looked rejected there. One can have many best friends. But anyway, we got off the track there with the aliens. We get all excited
all right.
with the aliens.
This is the point of the cocktail portion.
Yeah.
Get off track a little bit.
All right. It's all Stephanie's fault.
What?
Well, you're the one who brought up the aliens.
Well, you're right. It was my fault.
Well, but there are other there are other connections. Like I said, the language of the Gathas is very similar to Sanskrit, I think. And speaking of drugs, in the Zoroastrian tradition, they had halma, and then in the Indian tradition, you have soma.
Right.
And the words,
right.
I think, are etymologically related. There's definitely a connection there. And I like to think about this idea of the syncretism because, it shows that I think cultures have always borrowed from each other.
Right.
And so, I think that brings up ideas of cultural appropriation because people are very quick now in the 21st century that if you relate to anything from another culture, they really kind of start yelling cultural appropriation. Right. And I think we need to make a distinction between what is cultural appropriation and what is syncretism. Because this is something that seems to always happen.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's like a true sharing of ideas as well.
Right.
And it's not always an appropriation.
Right.
Although I can certainly see where things are an appropriation.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not sharing. It's actually just taking because you want to be cool or whatever.
Yeah. Don't dress up as a Native American for Halloween.
Right.
And always acknowledge where things come from.
Right.
Especially with when we look at all the various traditions, always acknowledge this is where it comes from. All right. So the Greeks had this idea of ages. There was also something similar in Jainism. I was trying to find that before we recorded, and I couldn't. But they also have cycles of time where it kind of goes from really good to really bad back to really good. And it just kind of keeps going like that. But they don't, as far as I know, there's nothing apocalyptic. And Jains are kind of atheists, very similar to Buddhism, where there is no creator God or gods in general. In fact, I think you'll find more gods in Mahayana Buddhism than you'll find in Jainism.
Wow.
Yeah, but they've got it too.
Right.
And I think in the Western esoteric traditions, you'll find this notion of ages as well. There's also this idea that there was a golden age of sorts. And I think it's called the Prisca Theologia, where there was this original theology, that original ideas that people had that have been lost and corrupted, and the idea is to always go back to that original time.
Right.
And I think that's something within the human psyche.
I would say so. I mean, even in astrology, people talking about the age of Aquarius, as being this, the dawning of the age of Aquarius as this golden age that's coming towards us to be something new, something great, of humanitarian wonder, bringing about something from the past, bringing back something also is in there. It's and I think we see that in everything, like a golden age of something, and whether or not it's true, we can argue that, and often, we have no idea what things were like during the last Aquarian period. Probably not.
But the music was much better back then.
Oh, obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously, music was
That's what
better.
people say about music, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to keep that in mind, because there does seem to be something about the human psyche where we want to look backwards. I mean, what immediately comes to mind, and I don't necessarily want to get all political here, but we also see this at play at Make America Great Again.
Right.
Yeah.
That
Right.
there was something back later, something previous that was better that we need to get
Right.
back to.
Right.
We have to go backwards instead of looking forwards.
Hmm. Or yeah, we've already talked about the ages of man and the whole idea of Hinduism, with the cycles, and it all starts high and it goes down low.
Hmm.
And same thing in our political structures, same thing in our I point out music, but everyone you talk to says, oh yeah, back when music was good.
Mm.
There's something, Nick, you're right, there's something in our human psyche that says there had to have been a time that was better than now.
Yeah. Well, and from a Western religious perspective, I think we see the same thing with the Eden story. That
Back to Eden.
we began in paradise, then we were sent out into the wild, into the wilderness, which is a scary place. But
Right.
there's always this idea of let's get back to Eden, let's get back
Right.
to the
Right.
original state.
Yep.
Yeah, it's curious.
There's always a better time.
Yeah. Well, and I
And
remember,
it's not where we are right now.
Yeah. Well, it boggles my mind that I see younger people now, looking to the 80s and saying, "Oh, that music was so awesome," and some of
Nothing
it
good
was.
came out of the 80s. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Prince.
Oh, okay.
I will
One exception.
fight you to death on that one, Jeremy.
I back down. One exception.
No, I think there are other exceptions. I think there was some good music,
There
but
may have been.
But Rick Ashley isn't one of them.
What?
Sorry.
Oh my God.
But I remember in the 80s, we were like, oh, no, it was, like the early 70s, the late 60s, early 70s. That's where music was good.
Right.
And I imagine that at some point, my parents, they were like, oh, no, it was the 50s. That's when music was really good.
Yep.
But, so yeah, we're always looking to the back. We're always looking to the past for some reason rather than looking forward to the future.
Right.
But maybe, because if it's the end of the world, maybe that's why we're going to do it.
And we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it.
So,
the world as we know it. All right,
yeah, I feel groovy. So we've got the Zoroastrian. We've looked a little bit about the Indian tradition. I'm trying to see. I think that's mostly what I had for the Indian tradition, actually. So there wasn't anything else in the Greek tradition because I was thinking about this and I'm like, well, I don't think there's anything apocalyptic that I'm aware of. The closest I could get would be with revelatory experiences, like with Eleusis and even the Dionysian traditions,
Right.
Which we talked about a little bit, I think, in a previous episode.
Right. But that's where we're getting to the different ideas of revelation, right? The different ideas of apocalypse, end of the world versus revelation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But then we get to, and the Greeks enter into this with Hermeticism. And Stephanie, you've already mentioned Alexandria. And I find Alexandria endlessly fascinating. Because that is the place, that's the source of so much that we still deal with today. Still have. Deal with is not the right way to say it, I don't think. But
yeah, it was the happening place between like 200 BCE to about 300 CE. It was, a hotbed of just all these ideas being shared. You had influences from Buddhism, from Hinduism. Of course, it's not Hinduism, but the influences of those cultures there.
Yeah, you had Brahmins there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Most people don't know that was all present in Alexandria at that time, and then you had Gnosticism coming into play around that time. And then Hermeticism coming, and we're not quite sure, I don't think, what really comes first. Hermeticism, Gnosticism.
Yeah.
I think they're both. Yeah, they both seem to be coming out of Neoplatonism. Um,
Are they
Go
though?
ahead.
Are they though? Because Neoplatonism is part of it, and
Yeah.
I think it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it is very hard to
Yeah,
tell.
I
There's
always use the analogy of a cauldron. That
yeah.
Alexandria is this cauldron that has, you have the Greek philosophy, you've got
Mhm.
Zoroastrianism, the Brahmanism, the Buddhism, Judaism, the Egyptian traditions,
Mhm.
and I'm probably missing some. But you stir it up, and then you get, all these
And then
different
you get
things.
all these things kind of coming out,
Yeah,
and they're all, even the old stuff is coming out new.
right.
It's all these new ideas are emerging.
Yeah,
Did
Christianity is coming out of that. Go
yeah,
ahead.
Jeremy,
did you say the new stuff or the new stuff?
probably new
This is where
stuff.
It's
this is
it's
where
the
the
new
new stuff. Okay,
new stuff,
sorry.
but the new stuff.
This is where the
Yeah,
new
I just
stuff
learned
comes
all
out.
this stuff. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
where I came from. All
Pluto
those
and
all those
Aquarius, man.
millennia ago.
Yeah, well, you've got Pluto, making hay in your chart, man.
It's true. It's true. Um,
Yeah, we're gonna go
but
get
there
tattoos.
Oh,
we're
of hay in the
looking. We're
chart.
looking.
Yeah.
But we have Hermeticism coming out at this time,
Yeah.
and we have these texts
Mm.
that are emerging, and um, somewhere around the second or third century CE,
Mm-hmm.
we have these texts coming into play, and they're saying um, quite interesting things. What makes them fascinating is that they're written as though they're from ancient Egypt,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
pre, um, the Egypt that we're in, where they're being written in, is, you know, far from what it started, during its heyday.
Mm.
It's already in um, its decline. It's already, um, being run by Greeks or Romans at this time. And it's at this time of the writings, um, you get this text called the Asclepius. And it's written as though it is um, about Egyptians for Egyptians. um,
Mm.
but it's written by Greeks for Greeks. So it's got this little subterfuge in there. It's written with a hindsight bias. It's written as
Right.
though it's much older than it actually is. So it's written as though uh, Hermes Trismegistus, who is the Hermes thrice great. He is either the god Hermes, or in the Greek, or the god Thoth in Egyptian, is disclosing this information to Asclepius, who is the grandson, I believe, of the god Asclepius. And um, in this text, in chapters, I believe, 24 or 26 through 26, he's talking about Egypt going through this great decline, from being this great wonder, this great philosophical center, cultural and philosophical center, that is now entering this horrible decline when all these foreigners are coming in. They are destroying all of Egypt. Philosophy is no
Mm.
longer considered important. It's skewed. It's the land itself is being poisoned. Um, just all these horrific things are going on. Um, let's say the gods of Egypt, because no one's worshiping them anymore, and because all these foreigners
Mhm.
have entered the
Mhm.
lands, the
Mhm.
gods have
Mhm.
left. The
Yeah.
gods have said, this is no longer a place for us.
Right.
Isn't that
So
isn't that parallel to what we see being said in a lot of MAGA? That it's
Yeah.
all the immigrants coming in that's destroying everything, and Jesus has been forgotten. We need to get prayer back into the schools.
War on Christmas.
So
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like this total societal breakdown is going on, and everything
Also.
is just horrid. So yeah, death is ruling over everything.
Right.
You know,
if you wonder
it's
where
just-
our political leanings are, for the viewers out there.
But it's also really about philosophy itself being forgotten.
Yeah.
And no one even understanding it. You know, the people who are there are only there, like the Egyptians there now are only the Egyptians there in name only. They don't know how to really speak the beauty of the language, which is kind of an interesting thing, because in the language was said to have been spoken in a way that was itself magic. So that is lost. So what happens is, do not fear. At some point, you know, the gods will send a new messenger, and everything will be revived. Everything will be brought back, and once again, the philosophy will reign over the land, and everything will be once again beautiful. And yeah, it is very much that idea of, you know, everything will be perfect again once this new messenger comes and relays everything again. You know, and there's different ways to look at this, obviously, but you know, we could look at it from a MAGA angle, and we could also look at it from, you know, a perspective that, you know, we all share of philosophy has been lost, hasn't it? You know, who really thinks
only
about
from my
it
brain.
much.
Only from my brain.
Yeah, right? So, yeah. So there's this belief of just utter devastation that can only be brought back when the gods send their messenger.
Yeah.
And what was I going to say? I had something on my mind. I forgot what it was.
Take a quick nap.
But oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, take a quick nap. It'll come back.
Yeah, right. But
You
it
can't
does
nap
actually
during live streams.
Hold on.
It has a lot of the same themes running in it as the Book of Daniel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Daniel talks about this time of in the Book of Daniel, there is this. It's taken out of time. You know, it looks like it's written in the time of the Babylonian exile.
Right.
But it's actually written during the time of the of Antiochus IV, who is the Greek king who comes in and decimates, you know, the Israel, right? And he comes in and he takes over, and they're in a chaotic period of time. And at this time, a little shortly after that, you're going to have the Maccabees come in as the heroes of the story, and Daniel's actually advocating against it. He's talking about let God take care of all of this, and he's in the story talking about walling up the prophecy for a later time, for a time when it's right to come out again. So it looks like it's coming out again during this time when the hegemony, when the
Right.
Antiochus is reign is going to begin.
Right.
When in fact, it's always
In
that's the time.
Antiochus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, and I apologize for my. I keep forgetting what I'm talking about.
That's all right. You're doing good.
He, um, the Asclepius is very much written in the same way, in that it's written by Greeks, talking about as though it's the time of Egypt, now being, unveiled to them during this new age, and this prophecy, this information now coming out during this time when it now can reign again. So it's giving it urgency as this revelation, when in fact it's what you would call hindsight bias. It's
right.
So it's kind of, it's a neat little I don't know, what would you call it, Nick, when they do that? They there's a literary term for it. Do you remember?
No.
Yeah.
I think it's
I don't know either.
Wait.
Literary
Vetinesia ex
chicanery.
eventu, I believe it's called, and it's basically hindsight bias.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So you take a story, make it seem like it was written a long time ago, and then it's released as though it was written 400 years ago, and it's really now.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what we were talking about previously. This idea that what was older is better.
Right.
Golden ages and whatnot.
Yeah, it gives a sense of authority to it, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, and what's older is not necessarily better. But likewise, what's new is not necessarily better.
Right.
We have to be able to have prudence to judge these things, what's better. Because there are some good things in what came before. But there are also some bad things, and there are good things that are coming and manifesting now. So what is what's the apocalyptic message in the Asclepius?
The apocalyptic message is basically that you have this time of decadence, of everything just going to crap, but a new messenger will be sent, a new person that is a messenger of the gods, that will reignite the philosophy and open the minds of the people once again. So there's this renewal, and it's very much a renewal of the people, of the land. So it's tied to Egypt. Egypt was kind of like, today what we think of ancient Greek and Roman and Egypt as well. But the Romans and the Greeks kind of look to Egypt in the same way we do look at them today.
Right.
So so they tie it to Egypt as this, mythological time, and this better time, and they really kind of build up that idea by talking about how the funny language of today, they're talking about the Greeks, it's just jibber jabber, the translation of it is basically, how the language it's just not as refined as it was.
Right.
It wasn't as nice and poetic and beautiful as it once was when in the time of when you spoke the Egyptian language, the beauty of it and the magic of it. So there's that element to it. So there's, the apocalyptic message is something great, something tremendous was lost. And now it will be found once again but it's going to take some work. It's going to take some time. It's going to get really bad. It's going to get terrible. And a lot of a lot of it is pretty much what you'd expect out of apocalyptic texts. Let me see if I could find some.
Well, while you're looking, I wanted to make a comment here that connects this idea of what came before is better. Because my understanding is, much of the Hermetic texts were lost because of Christianity. There's not a pagan text that Christians don't want to burn. But Islam preserved a lot of texts.
Right.
And it was during the Crusades that the Corpus Hermeticum was rediscovered. And the story is that Cosimo Medici in Florence was having, it was Marcello Ficino, I think, translate the works of Plato. But then when they discovered the Corpus Hermeticum, Cosimo Medici's like, stop what you're doing, translate this instead. Because the Corpus Hermeticum was thought to be better because of Hermes Trismegistus. Because Hermes Trismegistus, of course, was older than Plato. Goes back to Egypt. And it was like, this is the original knowledge. This is the wisdom traditions that we want. But then very early on in the Renaissance, someone's like, yeah, these texts aren't ancient Egyptian. These texts, probably about 200 or so of the Common Era.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were like, oh, well, then they're not that old, so I don't want to have anything to do with those. There's still wisdom in them, but yet people were like, yeah, they're not what we thought they were.
But they might be. Because
parts of them, for sure.
What they have found now is that the texts themselves really are rooted deeply in Egyptian tradition.
Yeah.
So I think what you have are Greek scholars who knew the Egyptian traditions very well, and that's where they got it from.
Yeah.
They used it in a way that was more towards their own philosophy, but though it's all very much rooted in Egyptian tradition. And when you think of it, they're in Alexandria.
Right.
They had the Library of Alexandria at their discretion. So they're going to write about stuff that they're probably reading. And the fact that we no longer have the Library of Alexandria and all of its contents, we just don't realize that they had more knowledge available to them than we have today. So I do think that while it was written by Greeks for Greeks, it was very much rooted in Egyptian understanding and traditions.
Yeah.
With probably Egyptian scholars working with them. It's to me, it's not unheard of. It'd be like, today going to any university where you have a bunch of scholars from different backgrounds all sharing in their knowledge of something.
Yeah.
But where was my text? I had my text and then I lost it.
Well, that's why I started
turned
talking.
A page. That was your fault.
Well, no, I was talking so that you could find the text,
I know, I had it, and then I flipped the page by accident. Hold on.
It was the aliens.
It was the aliens.
It's always the aliens.
Yeah, all right. So here, men will be weary of life and will cease seeing the universe as worthy of reverent wonder. Spirituality, the greatest of all blessings, will be threatened with extinction and believed a burden to be scorned. The world will no longer be loved, and an incomparable work of Atom, a glorious moment in his primal goodness, an instrument of the divine will to evoke veneration and praise in the beholder. Egypt will be widowed. Every sacred voice will be silenced. Darkness will be preferred to light. No eyes will be raised to heaven. The pure will be thought insane, and the impure will be honored as wise. The madmen will be believed brave, and the wicked esteemed as good. Knowledge of the immortal soul will be laughed at and denied. No reverent words worthy of heaven will be heard or believed.
That sounds like what we're living through.
Well, yeah, right?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Uh,
Right. No,
So-
but 50 years ago.
no, right now.
I know. It was better back 50 years. Never mind.
Yeah. Are you coming out
Nostalgia
as,
for-
are you coming out as MAGA, Jeremy?
No.
Okay, good.
Well, Hermeticism does have somewhat of the thought that one is like unto God. So there you might have it. If certain people think they're godlike,
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but that then begs the question of what do they mean by godlike?
Right. Good
Because
God?
that's the first question I always ask people. When they, this question, do you believe in God? I'm like, well, what do you mean by that?
Right.
How are you defining God?
Right. And which God?
that's true.
Yeah. Well, I have my altar to Ganesh, so I'm okay with that God. But biblical God, not so much.
All right. Flying spaghetti monster.
Is that become a god?
What is a God?
Well, yeah. He's always been a god.
Okay.
Where have you been? What kind of Rastafarian are you? Or sorry, Pastafarian.
I know. Right?
I'm sorry.
Too many
I don't know where
carbs.
my mind went. I'm going keto.
Oh,
No, I did keto for a while. But,
We have to renounce the Pastafarians.
that's
I'm
right.
going keto.
It's not atheist at this point. It's keto.
yeah. Well, I do
Well, I
find
wonder though, is keto then the great enemy?
Oh.
The great enemy of the Pastafarians?
Oh. We'll have to pose that question at a certain discussion boards.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah. So if anyone has any ideas about that, please post them in the comments below.
Right.
Always have to
The
remember,
important-
comment.
That's right.
The important
right.
questions get posed here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
We should actually post that as a question in the comments.
Right.
Is
And we
keto
could do
the
an
great-
episode on it if you've got information for us. Feel free to.
Yeah. Well, we've got this year planned out, plotted out, and I forget what is coming up next, but I know we're going to do Disclosure, I think, this summer, so I'm excited for that one because I'm all about the aliens. So we have this apocalyptic idea, especially with ages and looking backwards. We can see this in various traditions and how some of this seems so relevant because like what Steph you just read, the passage you just read, just seems relevant to our times.
It does.
And I think that's one of the things about apocalyptic literature and ideas is that they always seem relevant. It's like we're always in the apocalypse.
Right. Never
Well,
in the
that's-
golden age.
That's the thing about apocalypses, though, right? Because the time that they're written for is one thing, right? And you'll see that with anything. There's the time it was written for. It's very relevant then. But once that time has passed, it gets this cosmic uplift, right?
Right.
Because you can't talk about it in the same way you did when Nero was alive and he was the one that was being talked about, right?
Right.
So you have to lift it up in some way, and it becomes this cosmic forces of good and evil.
Right.
A time when no one believes in anything anymore. It's nihilistic, you know, and we have to get back to the basics. You know, we have to get back to when times were good.
Yeah.
But aren't we always kind of floating in that space
Yeah.
where things are just Do we really know of any golden era? Has there really been a golden age that we can talk about?
The Hyporian was golden, I hear. Age of Conan, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that one.
But isn't that
Other than that one?
isn't that fiction? Isn't Hyperborea fiction though?
It depends on who you talk to.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
that was around at the time. That's all I know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of before, if we look into a golden age, and, but this again is just like one point of view,
Right.
is before patriarchy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's one of them.
Yeah.
But
Right. That was a
then,
golden age.
but at that time, we could say it was a golden age. It was maybe more harmonious in terms of how we lived, but there were certainly other problems,
Yeah.
like animals that will eat you, and and disease and all that stuff still existed. There were still problems with our neighboring villages, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we could talk about times before the patriarchy, which would be a time when there were less people around. So I mean, what are we saying there? We need less people around.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, I'm actually thinking of a specific book, and it's I think Reinventing Eden by Carolyn Merchant, and Carolyn Merchant was an environmental historian at Berkeley.
Yeah.
And in the book, she's got this chart, and I'm trying to remember the chart in my brain, but it's based on the Eden narrative, and it's this idea that there once was this golden age, but then there was a fall, and then there is always this attempt to go back. And she shows how that pattern manifests in so many different ways. Right. And one of the ways it manifests is in the ecological conversations, that there was once this where humans were, in alignment with the natural, with nature and the natural world, but also with kind of ecofeminism. And I would suggest maybe feminism in general, maybe not, but to some extent with this idea that, before patriarchy, there was this, matriarchy and a great goddess, and everyone was all just happy and great and cool together. But so much of these things kind of tend to be mythic.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, we have matrilineal societies. Yeah. I don't think we have any evidence for matriarchal.
Right.
Right.
And that has to be noted. Yeah. Because I see a lot of people talking about before, when we had matriarchal, we never had a society where there were queens.
Right.
And we traced descent through the queen line. We never, ever had that.
Yeah. I mean, you had some queens, but you're right that it was never through the queen, right?
Right.
Yeah, your line was not traced through that way. But we have had matrilineal societies in which, but they weren't kingships. They weren't queenships. And they mostly were egalitarian societies, and that's beautiful. They seemed to work very well. They were at peace with the environment, which is what we need to be at peace with if we want to survive. But I think we don't have an active philosophy that works on how to do that again, because there's just too damn many of us.
Yeah.
How do you get an egalitarian society that doesn't have about 50 to 100 people in today's world?
Right.
I don't know.
Right. I guess we got to burn it all to the ground.
We do. We have to burn, no, we don't.
Well, we're kind of running out of time here. We're getting pretty close to the end. And the one thing that we haven't talked about that I kind of advertised was Ragnarok.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. We have to talk about, shirtless Chris Hemsworth and
yeah, okay, hold on. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you're not Chris Hemsworth. No offense, Jeremy.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe next year.
Yeah, I know you did like that whole muscle thing for a while. You kept posting about ripping out your shirts.
I think they're just old, really, the shirts. And
Okay. Yeah.
I just move around a little bit. And, oh, crap.
Okay. But yeah, let's talk about Ragnarok. That's Norse, and it doesn't actually. I find one parallel to the myth of Ragnarok with some others, but only one. And it's interesting because it's kind of like the reverse. But I think, Jeremy, you did some research on Ragnarok.
Just a little bit, yeah. The whole idea that the Norse gods, there's these entities called the Norn, and they're the fates, basically. And at some point, they're to decree that the gods are going to go into the final battle. And most of the gods are going to die. But the gods do it anyway because this is their fate. So Odin is swallowed by a Fenrir who had broken his chain. Fenrir is a wolf. And Fenrir eats everything. And the comment was made, is this capitalism? In a way. So
Yeah, that was
Odin,
my comment.
right.
Well, if
So
it eats
Fenrir-
everything, it's consumption, and that's what we do. We're
Right.
consuming everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Fenrir eats Odin, and then one of Odin's children kills Fenrir. Thor kills the Midgard serpent, which has come out of its depths or whatever. It's coming out and it's spitting poison all over the land. So Thor kills the Midgard serpent, but the poison kills Thor to the point, well, he can take 9 steps and then he dies. Loki breaks his chain, is freed from the cliff, and was killed by somebody else. The sun and the moon are swallowed. The stars disappear. The poison from the Midgard serpent poisons all the air, all the water, all the land. Eventually, the dragons come through with the fire giants and burn everything, and everyone dies, and the earth sinks back into the waters from which it came. And in the old stories, that's the end of it. If you get to about 400 years later, there's some more additions to the story about a couple of the gods survive, and 2 people who are hidden in trees come out and repopulate the new earth, which has risen from the water. So it becomes more cyclic.
Yeah, the only parallel that I found with other traditions with that myth, and I commented on this before we went live, that it seems to be a little bit, the differences in the other traditions that I found, it is at the beginning, at creation, whereas in the Norse story it's at the end. And that is in the Enuma Elish, or Elish, I've heard it pronounced both ways, which is the Babylonian creation story, which really begins with the god Marduk slaughtering the sea serpent monster, which is often thought of as being the ancient goddess, Tiamat. And Marduk then creates everything through the Tiamat's body, and there's a similar cosmology in the sense that the ancient cosmologies were always that the original condition was one of chaos, and chaos was represented by water.
Right.
And then the next step was the imposition of order onto chaos. And you have in the Norse the serpent, and I thought I had the name of the serpent written down, but I don't see it. I know. Oh yes, I do. Jormungandr or something.
Right. I don't speak Norse, so.
Yeah, but it's the serpent is in that cosmic ocean which surrounds there's the world tree, Yggdrasil, right? But you have the same thing in the Enuma Elish. Marduk splits Tiamat's body in half, and part of it becomes the land, and then the other part becomes the firmament.
Right.
Because the earth is in this like bubble surrounded by water. And I just have to say this because it's who I am. That is precisely the image that we get in Genesis 1.
Yes.
Because it's in the beginning, there was water. You have the Spirit of God moving over the face of the water, and it's like, well, what water?
Right.
It's the cosmic waters. And the term there...
Chaos.
Well, and it's interesting because the term in the Hebrew for the deep is Tehom.
Yes.
And Tehom is etymologically related to Tiamat. And creation is God creates the firmament, and the firmament is in the Hebrew, I forget the Hebrew word, but it means something like being hammered out. So it's like a metal. And so the earth, it's a flat earth that exists in this bubble surrounded by cosmic waters. But what fascinates me is that in the Ragnarok story, this is all at the end rather than the beginning.
Right. And we may have to go back to the original, the creation stories of the Norse to understand what was going on there. Yeah. But you're right. This is a re-entrance into the primordial chaos. I mean, the whole structure falls down.
Yeah.
And we do have, we have a lot of evidence that the story of the Babylonian creation story makes its way all the way across Europe. In different ways. That idea, the medieval idea of the king and the land are one, actually comes out of all of that.
Right.
It gets a little changed and warped along the way, but it still comes out of that Babylonian tale, which is older, the Assyrian before that. So it's, these stories migrate out.
Right.
And you could see them in all the different cultures. So it doesn't surprise me that we see it in the Norse tale. It's told a little bit differently, but then we can go and sort of piece it together. Okay, this is the Babylonian tale. This is the Canaanite tale of that. This is the Hebrew tale of that. And then here, look, as we go further into Europe, we start seeing, here's the Norse tale of that, here's the Irish tale of that, so, and we just don't talk about how it migrates out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting when you mentioned this connection between the king and the land. And and I forget exactly what it was, but there was something, I think, Steph, that you said earlier that also triggered this idea, and it was the Grail legends and the idea of the Fisher King, because the Fisher King is wounded and the land has been devastated.
Yes,
right.
Yes, that comes right out of it. If something, something happens to the land, something happens to the king, whatever. Those things relate, and so, that's the Grail tale is much older than Christianity. A lot of people think it's based in the tale of Joseph of Arimathea, and we have all that that conspiracy theory stuff that comes out of what's the book? What's that? Dan Brown book.
I can't think of it. Code.
The Da Vinci Code. That's it. Yeah. So you have all that, but no, it's so much older.
Yeah.
And so it all, you could see it all coming out of the Tigris and Euphrates area, just emerging out of there, and probably much older than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because we can only do this with writing, and so much, and we know when something had been an oral tradition that gets written down, but we don't have access to the oral traditions, which is really unfortunate because that could help us understand so much.
Yeah, I think also the initial understanding of that, the king and the land is one, I know this is getting off topic a little bit, comes out of this much older idea of the goddess, the goddess who chooses the king, and that comes through the priestess, the goddess or the priestess who is inhabited by the goddess who then picks the king.
Yeah, the hieroskamos.
Yeah, and she, I believe, marries the king, or the person.
Kind of, yeah.
And if the land does not prosper after 7 years, they kill the king,
Mm.
and then start that process again. And they get 7 years.
Yeah.
And if there's no prosperity, the king is killed, and then she marries again. She picks someone else.
Yeah.
And that part of the tradition kind of got lost along the way the more, after patriarchy comes in and the more you move west. But that's initially where that all began, just in case anyone
Yeah.
was interested.
Yeah, I'm looking into a lot of this because I've heard that story before, and there's a lot of scholarship that is, and I don't always agree with it, but it's something I'm thinking about, and I want to kind of create a video for it at some point. It'll probably be right before I die because I'm so busy trying to just support myself. Join my Patreon, please.
Patreon.
But I know I know a lot of scholars some scholars are now calling into question that story. But yet I see it in myth. And I know that I learned that it was annually, not every 7 years. It was annually that the new king would be appointed, and then the old king would be killed sacrificially, dismembered, and then the bits of the body would be planted in the fields. And there are other mythic stories that are similar to that. There's a story of Dasha's feast in Hinduism with Shiva carrying the corpse of his first wife, and bits of her body fall off as he's wandering around the subcontinent. And every place that a body part falls is sacred. And then you also, in the Egyptian, you have Osiris, who is dismembered. It's fascinating that, and because there is that mythic aspect, I don't want to say, that never occurred. That there isn't ever. I think that a lot of the people who are critiquing this, I think some of their critiques are important and we need to take them into consideration. But I also think that they miss a lot.
Yeah, I think when you have it popping up in so many myths, there's something there.
Right.
And when the stories are there and there are a lot of them,
it speaks
there's
to
something. Yeah, something's arising.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I guess that, one way is whether this actually happened or if it's all just kind of archetypal.
Right.
Well, it could very well just be archetypal.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yeah, it could be both, right? Could be both. Yeah, it could be both. And I think that's the thing to always keep in mind, that, we don't have to have this dualism of either or. It could always be both and.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So, what is there anything that we're missing? I would also note that the Ragnarok story, it seems like their cosmology is pretty similar, where you have the Earth at the center. And my understanding is it's like a world egg or something, where you have all these spheres around the Earth, but around Midgard, around the Earth, is water.
Right.
Water
right.
everywhere.
I haven't looked a lot into Norse myth cosmology, but it seems to me that there's different branches on the tree. I think Yggdrasil is the primary focus, and Midgard is maybe one of those branches, or it may be the world that Yggdrasil sits on. I forget now.
Yeah,
because Yggdrasil is shaken during Ragnarok, and all the mountains fall.
Right. Well, the Yggdrasil tree, I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's the axis mundi.
Right.
It's the world axis. It's the center of all things. And I think it's really fascinating that the center is shaking, right? That it's not holding as it should. Yeah. Now, I know that there are a lot of other apocalyptic ideas that we haven't covered. I know that before we began, Jeremy's like, "How about the Mayans?" I'm like, "Yeah, what about the Mayans? What about some of the Native American prophecies?" So at some point in the future, we're going to do apocalypses in the Americas, I think, to get to honor them and to acknowledge and explore, because I think those are important too. But we're running at the very end. So is there anything either of you wanted to add to any of this?
No, like and subscribe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like and subscribe, Rebel Spirit Radio, and also Kill Devil. I always do that.
Kill Devil.
Yeah, Kill Devil.
Come on, get with it.
Well, my pagan nature, I'm like, I can't kill the devil. I need to embrace my devils.
That's right.
My Jungian shadow work, right? But thank you both. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you for all of your insights. I think it's been fun. And I don't remember what we're doing for the next one in March, but we'll certainly advertise it.
Certainly.
Yeah. Do you remember what we're doing for March?
Easter.
Are we? Is it the Easter apocalypse?
I think so.
Yeah. That's what I was
March or
thinking
April?
earlier.
I
Yeah.
guess it's March because Easter's early
Right.
this year.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we have, the Easter apocalypse. Yay.
And if it's not, the advertisements will correct that.
Yeah, for sure. So yes, like and subscribe, and thank you for everyone who's joined us. It's greatly appreciated. All right. I'm going to...
Thank you, Nick. Goodbye.